Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this April 22nd, 2016 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. You can listen to my show every evening, 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. Pacific Time. Or if you can't catch that show, they also play my show at 11 a.m. Pacific Time. And if you can't catch either, go to my website at arcticbeacon.com. That's arcticbeacon.com, and you can get shows going back over a decade talking about the same subject I've always talked about. And I learned about it when I worked as a journalist in Rome, and I say all roads lead to Rome, and I call it the Vatican-led New World Order. My guest today is Dr. Jonathan Levi, and John's a friend of mine. He hasn't been at my show now. I think it's been about a year and a half. But he spent many, many hours with me talking about a whole bunch of cases that he works on. And he's a licensed attorney in California as well as a solicitor in England. And John, to say the least, takes on interesting cases. He's an international attorney working on cases in Biafra and Serbia and just all kinds of things that most lawyers never touch. And with that, he gets involved with the Vatican. And when I met John, we were the reason I brought him on. There's a case called Alprin v. Vatican Bank, and we left that about a year and a half ago when the Ninth Circuit dropped that case. And John said now it's still going. But John, tell me, this is a 12-year adventure with you. Give our listeners a chance to understand what Alprin v. Vatican Bank is, if they've forgotten, and give me the status of it right now.
Right. Hey, thanks for having me on, Greg. And
Okay.
yeah, it actually, we started this case back in 1999, so it's going on 20 years. Very, very long, sort of drawn-out case that's been through the U.S. courts, and it went through the European Commission, and now we took it straight to the Vatican. So what it's about, it's really quite simple. Under the Clinton administration, go all the way back to 1998, under the Clinton administration, a report came out of the U.S. State Department accusing the Vatican of having laundered a large amount of Nazi and fascist loot, gold, what have you, from the Balkans, former Yugoslavia. And that was part of the U.S. State Department's campaign at that time to clean up those Holocaust claims. Now, of course, what happened was the Jewish organizations, they got their pound of flesh out of Germany and Austria and other places, but the people from former Yugoslavia never got a penny. And, of course, that was because of Clinton and the Lewinsky case. You remember that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the tail wagging the dog. That is, Clinton suddenly needed a diversion, and that was to send NATO and bomb Yugoslavia out of existence, which it did, ostensibly because all those poor Muslim Albanians and such were being persecuted. So that's what happened, and then so the State Department dropped that case, which was good for me because I was asked by several groups to pick it up and try to file the court case on it.
So you filed a case in the, was it the Ninth Circuit?
Yeah, it was out in California, in San Francisco, in federal court. And it went through the federal court there, and it went through the Ninth Circuit, and it went up to the U.S. Supreme Court on a writ and came back. And the bottom line was the U.S. courts, after getting a lot of intense pressure, I believe, from the State Department under Bush, just dropped the case and said no jurisdiction exists in the United States. And they didn't really comment on the fact that the Vatican was in possession or had been in possession of Nazi loot, primarily through the Vatican Bank, but other places. There's volumes of evidence, we had witnesses, volumes of evidence, but the court just never would take it. We think there was State Department.
Well, who were the actual defendants in this case, so people can understand what you were? This was involved in a genocide. You're saying the Vatican was involved in, and they were involved in stealing a lot of money. And the people that your defendants were victims, right? Where their family members were victims of this genocide.
Right. One thing people forget about World War II, or maybe your listeners might know that the Jews were not the only victims of genocide. There were other groups, and one of the largest groups were Orthodox Christians, that is, non-Catholic Christians, who were persecuted throughout the Balkans and sent to special concentration camps. These are Eastern Orthodox Christians, mainly Serbs, but also others, and they were also despoiled of their property, and a bunch of that property came to be known as the Ustasha Treasury, and that's what we were looking at, and we traced it. Actually, I visited the physical building where it went to, which was the College of St. Jerome in Rome on the Tiber River, and on Via Tomacelli there, and just about half a mile from the Vatican. And then, of course, the funds were laundered through the Vatican Bank. But a lot of other groups and Catholic organizations were involved with that. And indeed, in the course of that investigation, we found that wasn't the only loot from World War II that went to the Vatican Bank. But unfortunately, the U.S. courts folded under pressure and would not let us litigate that case.
So you, during trying to get to the substantive matters of that case, you did a number of depositions. What was the most important one you think that brought out information that not only did they launder the money and involve themselves in getting the money to the Vatican Bank, but also their cooperation with the genocide of the actual people in Croatia?
Right. Well, there's been a lot of work done on that. In fact, it's just historic fact, Greg. I mean, there was a Catholic priest who was a commandant of a concentration camp in former Yugoslavia. They had Catholic priests who were in the government in Croatia during World War II. They had Catholic priests who were running the infamous rat lines, using the same money to send Nazis and fascists all over the world. So there were a lot of groups involved. And we had a witness, and actually we were very lucky. We had an actual witness, and in fact the best sort of witness, which was the man who investigated the entire ring of the Ustasha, the Croatian fascists, and the rat lines. His name was Bill Gowan. He's still alive, actually, and he was a special investigator for U.S. Army counterintelligence, and he was one of the lead investigators on the Nazi rat lines in 1946 to 1947. He gave 4 days worth of testimony and spared nobody, and he named names. So the evidence was there. Unfortunately, we never got to present it to a jury.
And what happens is the Ninth Circuit dismisses the case based on procedural matters. And what was the procedural matter that they dropped the case on?
They called it lack of jurisdiction. In other words, even though we had traced the funds, some of them back to a Franciscan monastery in Chicago, for example, the court said, there's no connection to the U.S. here, even though some of the people who were involved directly in laundering the money were sent to the U.S. to carry out activities here. The court said there's no real connection and threw us out and gave what was called sovereign immunity to the Vatican Bank. And they let the Franciscan order off the hook as well, and others who were associated with this. So it was basically a flim-flam job, and I think there was pressure by the Bush administration to get that thing dismissed.
So you spent a number of years, and then they basically just dismiss it without hearing any of the evidence or allowing a jury to hear anything.
Yeah, that's correct, but
go ahead.
That's not unusual for our federal court system. Not unusual.
Okay. And you said it's still alive, though, when we were chatting before the show. What do you mean by that?
Well, of course, it was not a dismissal with prejudice because there was never any finding of fact. The U.S. courts just wasted everyone's time for approximately, whatever it was, more than 10 years, and said, I guess we don't have jurisdiction now. Go away. And so we went away, and we filed the case with the European Commission because the Vatican had signed up with the European Central Bank as a issuer of the euro, and it was very, very odd. The Vatican almost never signs foreign treaties that puts it under anybody else's jurisdiction, as you know, because of course the Vatican is considered above all earthly sovereigns. But in this case, they really wanted to get their hands on euros, And I don't know if you've been to Rome, but the Vatican sells a Vatican euro coin for about 4 times face value, and that is a big money maker, the Vatican euros. And
I didn't know about that.
Yeah, I mean that's a large part of their slush fund is selling euros.
Yeah, because when I was there, when I was in Rome, it was still the lira.
Right, they were using the lira, but when they switched over to the euro, they had something there they could really sell, and they issue all sorts of euros, and of course, about fiat currency and what's worth about what the paper or the metal's worth, and they mark it up that hundreds or thousands of a percent and sell it to the millions of pilgrims, and that was a huge moneymaker. So they took a little chance there and put themselves under the authority of the European Central Bank and its anti-money laundering rules. And we filed a complaint with the European Central Bankers, and it went to the European Commission, and they were getting a little worried. We even got a little response from the Vatican Anti-Money Laundering Office. Oh, they have one.
They have one.
They've had one for a while now. Mind you, what anti-money laundering means at the Vatican may be different from what it means elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
But they have a guy there, Rene something or other, a former Liechtenstein banker, who's been there for years. And of course, they have 7 different anti-money laundering offices, being the Vatican, it'll befuddle you. But they were getting a little worried, and then they colluded together. I guess the Vatican Anti-Money Laundering Office had a little discussion with the European Commission, and they came up with this solution, which was, they said, this treaty between the European Central Bank and the Vatican is signed with Vatican City. Right?
Yeah.
And they said, but the Vatican Bank, you see, that is part of the Holy See. Which is different. It's different from from Vatican City. Now, we had proof, as usual. We had a signed document by the Vatican's attorney saying that the Vatican Bank was under the joint jurisdiction of the Holy See in Vatican City. But that didn't matter, because when we put that through, they stopped communicating.
Oh boy!
So that was the case with the European Commission.
They didn't want to do this. So after they don't communicate with you, so where's it at now?
Well, now see, but of course, again, that didn't kill the case. They just simply said, you have to go to the Holy See, they said. You can't come here. Go, take it to the Holy See. Well, the Holy See, of course, is what? That is the religious aspect of the Vatican, as opposed to the temporal, which is Vatican City. So how do you get at the Holy See? Well, I turned canon lawyer. I filed a canon law petition, and asking for direct hierarchical intervention by Pope Francis.
And what happened?
That's where it stands. Now, we served it. We actually had someone serve it on Archbishop of New York there, and it was served several other places, so they know about it. But
how long ago was that now?
About a year ago.
And they haven't responded yet?
No, of course they haven't responded. So that's where it stands. There's a canon law petition outlining all this, quite lengthy, and the Vatican has not responded.
Isn't there any kind of motions you can file for delay of the due process of justice so that you can get some action here? Isn't there any kind of an injunction or anything you could file?
Well, Greg, you tell me. What recourse do you have against the man who talks to God directly?
Oh, boy.
I suppose you can pray to God. That would be about it, because we filed it directly with the Pope.
Wow. And so he doesn't want to talk about that. But he's going around the country saying that he wants to have all of us distribute our wealth, that we're too rich here in America, right?
He certainly does that, and he certainly goes through the motions of creating numerous committees to audit each other and audit the Vatican Bank and do this, that, and the other. And he brought the child molester Cardinal Pell from Australia to head that up, and he does all sorts of things, but they don't involve actually doing anything except creating a lot of confusion and promoting a radical leftist agenda.
Exactly. And another interesting thing regarding the Vatican, there, when we were talking in depth on the Alperin v. Vatican Bank, there was an attorney in this country that represents the Pope. He's a solo practitioner, right?
That would be Jeffrey Lena. Now, I don't think Mr. Lena is involved. Lena was Last seen there with Pope Benedict and Cardinal Sodano.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, that's a while ago, and those people have all been purged by Francis. And of course, you know as well as I do that what was involved in the blackmail to get Benedict, the most conservative pope ever, to resign and do something that no one ever expected him to do, because no pope has ever resigned.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Mr. Lina is no longer directly involved to the same extent.
So he's not their attorney here anymore, you think, or
I don't think so, because I think things change as you move. The players change at the Vatican. Now, of course, at the higher levels, I would say there are certain people who don't change, and that's the Agnelli family, Fiat Motors.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, they have been the big bankrollers of the Vatican and their partner for years. So just remember, anytime you buy a Chrysler or a Fiat, you're probably directly contributing to the Vatican.
Yeah, so they own a lot of that company, just like they own a lot of a Bank of America as well, don't they?
Yeah. I mean, the Agnellis were the main beneficiaries of what happened in Italy after World War II, and they also were using the Vatican Bank to hide their funds because they were fascist collaborators. It's interesting. You would think the people who were supporting Mussolini wouldn't have come out so well after the Second War, but in the case of the Agnellis, they did. So anyway, at the higher levels, that doesn't change, but you do get changes at the Pope level and down below there.
Something interesting, during your research and work on Alperin v. Vatican Bank, you had a chance to really look at how much the Vatican really does own in this country and how they do operate as far as hiding their money, putting it in corporations. What did you find out as far as their wealth here in America? And that's just to say this country, not to mention the world.
Right. Well, first of all, if the Vatican was a person, they'd be in prison for about 1 billion years, because they've committed 1 million counts of what is called structuring. And that's a felony. And of course, you remember the Denny Hastert case?
No, go ahead. Tell me.
Dennis Hastert, the former.
I don't remember.
Who was arrested because he was paying off a blackmailer. His crime was structuring, which was taking out less than $10,000 from the bank in several transactions. They charged him a felony for that. The Vatican also is heavily involved in structuring, which means they never keep their money all in one place. Think about it. How many bank accounts, Catholic organization bank accounts, which are under the jurisdiction of the Pope, exist in the U.S.? Probably a million.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're just famous for setting up millions of foundations and churches and parishes and colleges. But it's all orders. It's all the Vatican. It's all under the control of the Pope. And it's all tax-free. Nobody knows how much they own. So if you have a Catholic foundation or charity, what do they own? Well, nobody knows. Who audits them? Nobody. They're 501c3 foundations or churches or what have you. So nobody knows, but it's a vast amount of property and businesses are directly controlled from the Vatican.
Yeah, and you also, when you tried to get any accountability from the Vatican Bank, I'm sure it hasn't changed much now. What kind of stumbling blocks do you run into? Normally, banks have procedures, they have accountability, they know what money's coming in, where it's coming from, how much is going out. They have regulators that control these things.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how come the Vatican Bank doesn't? What did you find out?
It's not a bank. I mean, we call it colloquially the Vatican Bank. Its official name, of course, is the Institute for Religious Works.
Mm-hmm.
And it is one of 2 or 3 major organizations that's always changing there at the Vatican that manages their money. Institute for Religious Works, one of the small things they do is banking. I mean, they run the ATM machines in the Vatican, and they have one alleged bank branch at the Vatican. Of course, you can't just walk in there, not you or me. And they have correspondent accounts at Deutsche Bank and places like that. But that's just one part of their financial operation. So it's not really a bank. Now they do have a canonical charter that they work under, which says you can deposit money there as a private individual as long as a portion of it is marked for pious purposes. Well, that sounds like money laundering, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But that's how they operate. But the reason you don't see anything is because they're not really a bank. And what you do see from the Vatican is phony as a $3 bill. I mean, you know that the Vatican comes out with this annual budget every year, right? Oh, it's like $23 million, and they're always like $2 million in the red, and we're like, what? All you got is $23 million a year income? How's that possible? and your assets are like 12 million. Who's doing your taxes there, Pope? And so they lie. And then you'll say, what painting at the Vatican Museum is worth more than? Oh, but we can't count those as assets. No, sir. You know?
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah. It's a bank, but it's not a bank. Everybody puts their dirty money there, then it's laundered and cleaned out and sent to banks all over the world.
That's right. I mean, it's just part of their duplicitous operations.
You know, when I was looking into Operation Gladio when I was in Rome, one interesting thing I found out was that the Vatican cut on some of this drug money, and they're involved heavily in this idea of the cartels and the drug money going to the governments to fund these wars, and the money has to be put somewhere. So they go through the Vatican Bank with a lot of it. And I found out the Vatican gets about 15% on anything that goes through there. Now, isn't there, no one keeps track of that, I guess, huh?
No, and that of course, now one thing Francis would like to know is he'd like to get a bigger cut because I guess some of the underlings were making off with the money. I mean, that's what all these audits are about, not to get to the bottom of anything, but to less leakage there. I mean, they'd like that money to go to the top guy.
Okay, so the Alperin v. Vatican Bank is completely dead in America, right? You can't do anything more here.
No, what it is, it's a canon law petition. Canon law petition against the Vatican Bank, against Cardinal Pell, who supposedly is auditing the Vatican Bank, against the Vatican Financial Intelligence Unit, which we believe is covering up the whole thing.
And I guess their strategy is similar to Alperin v. Vatican Bank, keep you on the hook for 20 years, and then hopefully it goes away, right?
You know, they'll do what the Vatican does best, which is stonewall things for centuries. But we'll keep on them as long as we can keep on them.
All right, good. You know, we got about a minute and a half in this segment. I know you're working on a whole bunch of other things, so I think we'll wait and talk about those in the second half hour. But one question I had regarding, what's your thoughts regarding what Francis is really up to here? What is he trying to do it in this country? He's acting as if he's part of our country, coming and speaking to the Congress, to the UN. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, of course, in regards to the U.S., he's just continuing the previous policies of the Catholic Church, which is to encourage immigration of Catholics. Now, they may talk about Muslims and this and that, but the main goal there is just to keep the gates open so Catholics can come up from South America. That's the agenda, and that's what Catholic Charities does, and Caritas, and all the big organizations, and the churches, and the sanctuary movement. You know, that's the agenda: get more Catholics into the country.
Right. Well, listen, John, we're going to take a break right now. And is there any website people can go to look at Alperin v. Vatican Bank if they want to read more?
Well, we left a lot of material out on the internet, so if you just Google Alperin, ALPERIN versus Vatican Bank, that information will come up. One thing we made sure is we stashed evidence wherever possible all over the internet so it wouldn't go away.
Yeah, good. Okay, we're going to take a break. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. My guest is Dr. Jonathan Levi, and we're going to get back to some of the other interesting cases that he does on an international scene, and I think you'll find it quite interesting. Back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The rapture will be canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the left behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Okay, welcome back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal. You can catch my show on FirstAmendmentRadio.com, and please go there and tell your friends, because that's how we get this show to grow. The major advertisers, of course, do not want to talk about this kind of truth, and so we have to plug along that way. So make sure you tell your friends. You can also go to my website and donate whatever you can. I tell you, it's well worth it. Better than giving your money to all these crooked politicians. I can't believe the money they raise. Bernie Sanders, $27 a head. Boy, I'll tell you, not a bad racket. But anyway, go ahead and give $10 to my site and keep this radio station going. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. This is the Investigative Journal. And my guest is Jon Levi, a licensed attorney in California as well as a solicitor in England. And Dr. Levi has done so many interesting cases, and I've learned so much from him over the years. He did mention, during the break we were discussing this explosion of YouTubes, and I'd mentioned as a journalist, I don't really have to interview people anymore. I just go to their YouTube and let them talk because they're going to say the same thing anyway. But John said something interesting. He said it isn't an explosion of information. It's actually limiting what you're going to see. How does that work, John? You looked into YouTube.
Right. Well, I do a lot of writing myself occasionally, and one thing we've noticed is that YouTube works a lot like Google, which is not surprising because I believe Google owns YouTube. Mm-hmm. They will push the information they want pushed out there and bury information they don't want. So, for example, I write political pieces that are published in good media sources, not blogs, but things with normal circulation worldwide. I have trouble finding it. You type it in, it's not there. And we've noticed the same on YouTube, that you'll see content that YouTube wants to get hits. It'll be out there. I'll have 20 million hits on some kind of strange little someone picking their nose or something, whereas Greg Szymanski talking about important things might get 100 hits, even though more people might be interested in it. So you think about it, and you think about what are they doing here deliberately? What is Gates doing, and what is Zuckerberg doing, and what are they doing? Well, or Zuckerman, whatever his name is, and I think they're messing with their heads is what they're doing. They're hiding information, and they're not creating a level playing field because, by golly, they own the playing field.
Exactly. What's the technical term you use to explain what they're doing? Algorithms?
They've got algorithms. So they there's not a little Google man there. There's not a person, but there's artificial intelligence, and it scans the content. And if there's stuff in there that is on the bad list, they make sure it's pushed far away or never sees the light of day. So if it's innocuous and stupid, and they can make money from it, well, you'll end up at that place whether you're looking for it or not.
Yeah, so basically a lot of people thinking that they're going to get all this information out, actually they're going to get 20 hits. And basically it's just like talking to your relatives or something, right?
Well, exactly. And my clients and other people over the years have complained about having been disappeared from Google. And it does happen. And, of course, YouTube, it works the same way. So if people have found your information, they need to, keep a finger on that, make sure they bookmark it, because you may not be able to find it so easily using the so-called search engines.
And you also said for those people who want to start a YouTube channel and they want to get their voice out there, to sign up with their advertising, then you don't have to pay anything, and that may get you more hits, right?
Yeah, it will, because, of course, first and foremost, these guys are there to make money for their shareholders. So if they think they can make money off you, they might overlook your content if they think it's a moneymaker.
All right, that helps a lot. Let's move on. You're working on cases in Eastern Europe and in Africa. Let's start in Eastern Europe. Tell me what's going on there in some of your cases.
Right. Well, we're working in two areas, Serbia and Ukraine, but it's part of a larger issue where, it's one of these strange things where people who we normally call fascists and Nazis are suddenly Democrats, and people who are anti-fascists are now the fascists in our Western media. So, for example, who's described as a fascist? Putin. Putin's described as a fascist. Orban, the president of Hungary, is allegedly a fascist. These people are not fascists in the conventional sense. They're nationalists, and they're actually virulently anti-fascist. Whereas countries that have fascist leanings, such as Croatia, are not described as fascists. So there's very strange. The Ukrainian government is a fascist government. In fact, drawing on the past history of fascism in Ukraine and pro-Nazi. In fact, you've seen it on the news. The Ukrainian militias marching around with Nazi indicia, right? A strange-looking crosses, which they claim are not Nazi crosses. Why those? That's an N with a vertical line through it. Right? And of course, it isn't. It's the wolf-angle. So it's an SS symbol from, I think, the Hermann Goering Brigade or something. So I mean, that's what's going on. And these are the Democrats. The Ukrainian government is the democratic government, and the people they're fighting are the fascists. Well, they got it backwards. And it's part of something that, remember you said all roads lead to Rome.
Right.
There's something called the Intermarium Plan and the Prometheus Plan, which were developed before and after the Second War to destroy Russia and bring in a pro-Rome regime from the Baltic to the Black Sea and to break Russia or Soviet Union into a bunch of small, insignificant countries that could be easily controlled. And that's what's going on there. In Ukraine, that's a major thrust of it, the change of governments. The coup d'etat took out the elected government and put in the so-called democratic government, which actually is a Catholic fascist government. So I've been working on that. We're trying to see if there will ever be a war crimes investigation for Ukraine. It doesn't seem to be happening, does it? And
no.
You remember the airliner that was shot down over Ukraine?
Right. Yeah. What's going on there?
Well, what's going on with that? Yeah. What is going on with that? Nothing. It's been covered up. And so remember they had, we've got all the goods, Putin himself lit the match that shot that down, right?
Mm-hmm.
So suddenly there's no evidence. Suddenly the whole investigation's been sidelined.
So what do you think did happen there?
Well, the Russians and other credible sources said the U.S. had satellites in the area. The U.S. knows exactly what happened. And it would appear that a Ukrainian missile shot down the plane for various reasons that have been theorized. Because if the Russians did it, they'd be all over them, now wouldn't they?
Mm-hmm.
They'd catch them red-handed. That hasn't happened, and there hasn't been a fine.
Wow.
So there you go. Yeah. So there's all kinds, and there was remember I don't know if you remember the Odessa massacre that happened early on, where about 100 people were burned to death, herded into a building and lit on fire down there, and that was never investigated either. The official story was, well, they lit themselves on fire.
Wow. So what's the future of that country now? What do you think? It's going to fall into Russian hands, or?
Well, if there were democratic elections, people would probably vote to toss out the current government and probably realign with Russia, but they're not going to get that chance, most likely. There's not a good outcome there at all. The Russians aren't, they don't want the country. I mean, they could have easily occupied it at the very start if they wanted to. There wasn't even a Ukrainian army.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to stay as until we get a change of administrations in Washington. Hopefully not Hillary, but as long as it's not Hillary Clinton, we'll probably see that situation resolved somehow when support for the proto-fascist regime in Kyiv is withdrawn.
Okay. Hey, do you want to move on to Africa here in the rest of the show? What are the cases you're working on there?
Right. Well, we're also doing a lot of work in Africa, and it's interesting because Africa is on the forefront of the divide between Christians and Muslims, or radical Islam. And what people don't realize is where are most of the victims of ISIS coming from, Greg?
Mm-hmm.
Africa. That's where, because Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab are affiliated with ISIS now. And ISIS is the central command. ISIS has taken over a good portion of the country of Libya. Mm-hmm. They control most of Somalia. They control part of Nigeria. They control areas in the Sahara. And what they don't control, good old Al-Qaeda does. So what's going on there? I mean, you have this huge presence, thousands of people, tens of thousands of people killed and tortured in Africa by ISIS. So what's going on? Well, you have what's happening is you have the Muslims in general are taking over more and more territory in Africa. Christians are being eliminated. So, for example, in Egypt, used to be a 10% Christian population, Coptic Christians. They're in great danger. In other parts of Africa, Gambia, which used to be a secular country, is now the Islamic Republic of Gambia. And the most important country in Africa, the largest country population-wise and economy-wise, is Nigeria. And what's happened there is a Muslim is now the president, and the Christians are being concentrated in the south and southeast of the country, what used to be called Biafra, and they realize now, 60 million strong, that they're getting surrounded by radical Islam, and a Muslim president in this day and age isn't going to protect them. So we're working with the Biafran patriots. We hope that there will be a new country in Africa, or the Republic of Biafra as a Christian nation will be reestablished.
And what kind of stumbling blocks do you run into there? How do you file a legal case there? What kind of court system do they have? Is it possible even?
Right. Well, obviously the Nigerian government has been killing and imprisoning people who are supporting Biafra. That's been covered up in the Western press. I think Newsweek's reported on it, but not a whole lot of the mainstream press. There is actually kind of a conflict going on there right now. But what you do is you take that around the international courts. So, for example, first place we went was the International Criminal Court, because Boko Haram, for example, a virulent offshoot of ISIS, has been murdering Christians throughout Nigeria by the thousands. And, of course, everyone thought, well, the International Criminal Court, it set up the deal of genocide. It has jurisdiction over Nigeria. What do you think they did, Greg?
Nothing. Huh?
Nothing. And we're like, why? Why has there never been a genocide or war crimes or crime against humanity case filed against Al-Qaeda or ISIS or Al-Shabaab or Boko Haram? Why? I'll tell you why. Because the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, Fatou Bensouda, is a radical Muslim who she is making all as a black woman who's and a Muslim, she's beyond reproach, right? Can't criticize her, and she's come up with some ridiculous thing. Oh well, maybe that ISIS, it's really over in Syria, and we don't have jurisdiction over Syria, right? Mm-hmm. And that she's come up with all sorts of nonsense excuses. So that court was ruled out, and then you have the UN or the EU, and they're about worthless too. About the last thing they're going to do is act against the Nigerian government. So it's looking pretty grim, and but we are trying, and we're hoping maybe we can help organize a nonviolent movement down there to try to gain self-determination. But it doesn't look good.
But what you're saying is that there are many more people dying, there are more Christians dying there than ever reported here in the States, correct?
That's right. Only a few people have come out. For example, a former Congressman, Bob Dornan, we've been working with him, and he came out. He came out publicly and said there should be a referendum down there for the Christians to get out from under Muslim rule. Mm-hmm. But aside from Bob Dornan, who was... He knew about Biafra because he'd worked there during the Civil War, 1967, 1970, on mercy flights, flying children in and out and flying supplies in. But Dornan's the only one who seems to know about it.
When you work on these cases and you're working with these people being under the thumb of these radical Muslims. What are they talking about how this stuff is created? Where are these radical Muslims actually coming from? How does Boko Haram get their money? From what you found out? I mean, I've got my ideas, but how do they get funded?
Well, of course, they get it the same way ISIS does. So in the case of Boko Haram, they get it from the Nigerian government, just as ISIS is supplied by the U.S. government or Turkey. Mm-hmm. It works the same way. The Nigerian government, which is Muslim, and wants to see Sharia law throughout Nigeria, even though Nigeria is Africa's largest Christian country with 60 to 80 million Christians. It's a lot of Christians, right, Greg?
Yeah, I didn't realize that. In Nigeria, you're saying there's 60 to 80 million Christians.
Yeah, mainly Catholics. And not all, but mainly. And they'd like to eradicate them. And the money comes from the Nigerian government, in my opinion. Where else would it come from?
Now, why isn't the Pope standing up for them? Or is he, and then not really doing anything?
Well, again, you have a radical Pope who isn't really interested in situations like that. The Vatican does what it does for its own reasons, right? Mm-hmm. So you won't see the Pope. Why has the Pope never spoken out against ISIS? Much. Mm-hmm. Speaks out a little bit now and then, but doesn't say much. But best he can do is help call for more ISIS sympathizers posing as refugees to come to Europe. That's what the Pope does.
You're saying there's a connection between Boko Haram, all these groups there, and ISIS. So basically their ideology is similar, they just use different names?
Well, it's the same. So, for example, Boko Haram pledged allegiance to ISIS. So it is now a subsidiary of ISIS.
Okay. What about all those, remember that kidnapping of those 200 children? Is anything going on with that still?
Well, that is just one of many Boko Haram atrocities that occur on a daily basis down there. Now, the latest tactic is they're using children as suicide bombers. Mm-hmm. That is, either threatening them or drugging them and sending them in with bombs strapped to them throughout that part of Africa, Nigeria, Cameroon, Chad. Those areas have been suffering from children bombs. They've also been using animals, strapping bombs to birds and things like that, trying to get.
So you're saying this genocide's going on a daily basis there?
It's on a daily basis, and you're not going to hear much about it in our press, but that's what's happening. And
are they making any distinction between Catholics and Christians, or don't they care?
They don't care. They in fact, they also slaughtered about 400 Shia Muslims a couple months ago as well. Mm-hmm. The Nigerian government did that. And so they want anyone out of there who's not a Sunni Muslim. And you know how that works. So Shias, Jews, Christians, they're all considered infidels. Mm-hmm. And so that's what's happened. Now we've on my part we've written and filed things with the European Union and English government. We've said, look, you're worried about refugees. What the hell do you guys think is going to happen when there's civil war in Nigeria? There's 180 million people there. Syria has 20 million.
Yeah, they're going to be all coming to Europe too, right?
Where do you think those Nigerians and Biafrans and Hausa and Fulani and Yoruba and whoever's down there, where are they going to go? They're going to go to Europe. And they'll come right up through the same route that they're talking about today in the news, which is up through North Africa into Italy.
You know, getting back to Serbia. There was an article I just read about you. You were standing up for someone. God, I wish I could pull the article. Maybe I can't pull the article.
Well, that would be the former deputy prime minister Vojislav Šešelj, Dr. Šešelj. And I've worked with him, and I've been attorney for his political party, the Radical Nationalist Party there. And Dr. Šešelj worked a miracle. He was arrested by the UN Tribunal for Yugoslavia, something like 14 years ago, and he represented himself, refused to take one of their so-called attorneys, and he fought them tooth and nail. All this time he was finally acquitted, although it was like a 10-year trial.
And what exactly was he fighting for?
Well, they charged him with genocide.
Okay.
And of course, what was his crime? His crime was to speak out about the Mujahideen who were infiltrating Bosnia and Albania at the time. Mm-hmm. So at least there was two out of three judges finally agreed that the UN had falsely charged the man. Of course, he had to be imprisoned for over 10 years while his trial was going on. So he's back. He's back in Serbia, and hopefully he'll be moving into the government there, displacing the EU and CIA stooges who are in there right now.
So okay, I just wanted to check up on that because you sent me a story regarding that. Getting back to our country here and what's really going on, I wanted to get your thoughts regarding this election process this year. I find it to be probably one of the most interesting ones with the characters they've selected. And I find in both the Republican and Democratic Party, we're seeing this divergence of views, the establishment against Bernie Sanders, the establishment in the Republican Party against Trump. How do you see this playing out? I mean, what really is going on here? I mean, they're all, I believe, all selected to be there for a reason. But in the end, what is this reason?
Yeah, well, you have a dispute among the elites and oligarchs and who run these things. Because remember, you're not going to get in there unless you're part of the system or you're well vetted, or maybe in the case of Trump that you're so rich they can't keep you out. Because, of course, money talks, right? Mm-hmm. And for example, Ted Cruz, I truly do believe he's probably not eligible to run for president. But the courts have disagreed on that. But
because of his Canadian citizenship, or
right, he's a Canadian citizen. He was until recently, and additionally, he's another Manchurian candidate like Obama. Where'd he come from? Mm-hmm. What's his background? Another Harvard Law School graduate who went to Princeton, but yet his father was a dishwasher. But then when you look at his father's background, he worked for the Bush apparatus in the CIA.
Exactly. And I get some emails regarding his connection to the Cuban situation going on around Kennedy and how he was involved maybe with Oswald.
Well, who knows? But it's like Obama. What was Obama's mother up to?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And the sainted mother of Obama. But wait a minute, she was some kind of operative working in all these foreign countries. It would have been pretty strange to have child out of wedlock with an African back in 1962 or whenever it was, or 64, wouldn't it? Even in Hawaii. So, I mean, a very strange situation with Obama, and Cruz's story is equally odd. What happened to Cruz's mother? They don't talk about her now, do they?
No, and it's interesting, when you look at this situation, when Trump comes out...
So the answer is, look at these people's background. Hillary Clinton, her background. There's no mystery there what you'd be getting. And, Sanders, on the other hand, they haven't really probed into his background much either.
No, and I just reported on, he just came back from the Vatican after when he was doing the New York primary. He slipped to Rome for a couple days and had a little meeting with the Pope.
He did it. What's an avowed democratic socialist care what the Pope says?
That's what I'm saying. It's so, it's getting to a point where they're just sticking it in our noses, and they feel they can do exactly what they want. But anyway, when they got a couple minutes, the idea of this wall that Trump wants to build, what's the is this just rhetoric or what? I can't imagine somebody saying that in the year 2016.
Well, I live here in South Carolina. When Donald Trump came to town, I saw him. I went there, I heard his speech, and he was very clear, Greg. He said, I'm going to build a wall. This is what it's going to look like. And we surely could do it. And he said, look, the technology would make it very simple to build the wall. He said, look, the Chinese built the Great Wall of China and didn't have any modern equipment. And he said, my wall will be much smaller than that. But, I think the fact is walls do work. The Israelis have built walls for security purposes, and those have been successful. Other countries have built security walls, and in fact, it's quite legal. You have the right to protect your border. I mean, why do borders have to be open? And unless you're part of the Open Societies Foundation, why would you be advocating for open borders? Therefore, if people won't respect your border and you can't shoot them, then the most humane thing to do is put up a wall.
And keep them out.
All keep them out. I think it's perfectly, I can't think of any legal reason why you couldn't have a wall.
All right, John, that's interesting. Hey, we're all out of time. And promise you come on again in the next couple of weeks. We'll see if we can keep up on some of these stories and keep up the good work. And let me just say one thing. Is there a specific website that you have, or are you just putting things up on the internet?
Well, you can go to my website if you want to contact me, brimstoneandcompany.com, BRIMSTONE and company.com. If you're interested in Africa, you could go to oeas.info.
Okay.
Which is an organization I work with, and there you go.
Okay, John, thanks a lot. We're all out of time. And listen, we'll have you on again. Good night, and we'll see you tomorrow on the Investigative Journal.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.